The latest episode of Dark Side of the Ring aired on Vice Channel on Thursday night, chronicling the sad life and career of Luna Vachon. Now, this was an interesting one because Luna has a really interesting career. She was a really interesting personality in wrestling, and one that I remember very well from back in the day. Now, when she had come into WWE, all I knew of her at that point was the magazines. When she showed up at WrestleMania 9, I knew right away who she was, but I'd never really seen her physically moving before. I just seen pictures and knew who Luna was. So when she came in, she was a really interesting kind of character to have there at the time because they didn't really have a women's division. Most of the women there were valets and managers and stuff. So she, tried her best to fit in, and they did a lot of different things with her, pairing her with certain guys so she could get a little bit physical in the ring and whatnot. And I always thought she was just really, really interesting, and the shaved head and the veins drawn on it, interesting look, the voice, everything about Luna was very, very interesting to say the least. And as a kid, or as a teenager, I should say, I was, kind of fascinated with her because there's just nothing like her. There's nothing like her in wrestling. And honestly, you hear the phrase tossed around a lot when it comes to wrestling, when you hear the term before their time. I don't think anybody epitomizes that more than Luna Vachon. She was truly before her time. Imagine her coming around now or, a little bit later on when women's wrestling was a little bit more frequent in WWE. Right after she left, that's when Trish got on the map and things like that. And so if she was able to stick around or come around during that time period, boy, she would have made a great competitor at that time. Imagine a match between her and Lisa Marie or Victoria around that time, some hardcore match. Remember that match Victoria and Trish had at like a Survivor Series that was just super brutal and gnarly? Imagine Luna being in there, how vicious and evil those girls could get with each other. It would have been great. So she was just eons before her time, unfortunately, but her life was kind of a sad one. And they kind of detailed everything here, including a couple of things I wasn't aware of, a couple of revelations, I should say, that I didn't know, and some more moolah allegations and accusations as well. So they had a lot of people interviewed for this thing, including her father, Paul Butcher Vachon, also Medusa. They had Mad Maxine, former women's wrestler, Mick Foley, Gangrel, who of course was married to Luna for many years, and Luna's son. I believe his name is Van, and somebody pointed out to me, or I saw on social media somewhere, that he was actually a contestant on Hell's Kitchen. I think is that the one with Gordon Ramsay, that angry British chef or whatever that screams and yells. I think that's the one. He was on a couple of seasons of that, apparently. So I had no idea that was the case. And he did mention culinary school in the documentary. So he has been on TV before, and I was completely unaware of that. So those were some of the names interviewed for this thing. They talk about Luna's childhood and how she was actually brought into the Vachon family. Now, this is something that I did not know until the documentary. I did not know that she was adopted into the family. I thought she was a legitimate Vachon, but apparently she was not. This is a story that I just never heard, never researched, never learned. And Butcher tells the very graphic story of him hearing a gunshot when he was sleeping one night and didn't think much of it, and the next day he wakes up to a sobbing widow who finds out that her husband had killed himself, and with the widow is a 4-year-old girl who was Luna Vachon. So Paul Vachon, I guess, was there to comfort this mother who just underwent this tragedy, and I guess got with her, and Luna was then adopted into the family. Now, one thing I didn't know, I don't know if the fellow who committed suicide was her father. I don't think it was, but anyway, basically that's how she was brought into the family. Now, she idolized her aunt, who was a wrestler. Of course, we know Butcher Vachon is a wrestler, Mad Dog Vachon, big clan of wrestlers in that family. So bringing in Luna, she was fascinated by the life, and she wanted to be a part of that life. And so she began training with Fabulous Moolah. And this is where they had more Fabulous Moolah accusations, kind of basically hinting that she had pimped out Luna Vachon like she had pimped out so many others, like we heard about in the Moolah Dark Side of the Ring episode. And also with her ridiculous booking fees and the abuse and basically just the overall advantage that was being taken of a lot of these women's wrestlers that she was training. And the same was done to Luna. So she had to get the hell out of there. She did. And when she was working a lot of the territories and stuff, I believe then late 80s, that's where she met David Heath, or Gangrel. And he was on this documentary telling a lot of funny stories. And he kind of mentioned how they didn't really like her at first. They didn't really like each other. He thought she was weird or something like that. But as time went by, they became friends, and they became more than friends, and they wound up actually getting married, and they remained together for many, many years. Now, they both, especially her, got hard into drugs. That was detailed here in a pretty graphic description. And Gangrel teases that also something might have happened with Luna and a family member, possibly Vivian, who was like her aunt, apparently, that she idolized. So he kind of mentions and feels like he's almost like about to tell a story about some sort of abuse here, but then they kind of don't mention it again. So it was kind of jolting. I'm like, oh shit, what happened there? And they didn't really follow up on it. So, this just adds to so much of Luna's mental instability. She dealt with mental health issues her entire life, and had to exist in a wrestling family and in the wrestling business where there is so much rampant drug use and alcohol abuse and a lot of just bad things going on, places you don't want to be, and just living lifestyles you don't want and need to be living, especially if you're somebody who suffers from mental health issues. And this was becoming more and more apparent as the episode went on, that pro wrestling was just not a good place for her, because it was just loaded with all of these vices and this temptation and a lot of the drug use, which really consumed her life and compounded with the mental issues she had, made her very difficult to deal with, made her temperamental, and put her in a lot of toxic environments. Now, they would go on to talk about her debut in WWE. I think her and Gangrel were both trying to get into the company. She got there first, debuting at, like I said earlier, WrestleMania 9, when she came out and attacked Sherry, who had just recently turned babyface and was now kind of against Shawn Michaels. And Luna, I would think it was the Shawn Tatanka match at Mania. Luna comes out, attacks Sherry, who was at ringside. They even brawl backstage in the medical area. They would have a crazy brawl like the following Monday, or maybe a couple of weeks later, on Raw, where they battled all over the Manhattan Center. And I remember Sherry got her top ripped off, and she was holding like Macho Man's hat to cover up her boobs, who were really starting to hang out there. I mean, they just tore into each other, and it was I was like, man, Sherry was always so crazy, so animated, so over the top, especially in a managerial role with Savage and stuff. She is now met her match in terms of craziness, but the angle and the feud never really had a chance to get going, because Sherry abruptly left the WWE right in the middle of that and headed to WCW. I don't even know why Sherry left, if she let go, if she was released, or if they fired her for drugs or whatnot, but she was gone, and that whole feud basically was stopped in its tracks. And that's when they moved her on to team up with Bam Bam Bigelow. He or she was his main squeeze, and that allowed her to do a couple of tag matches. They did one at WrestleMania 10. She's actually worked a couple of WrestleMania matches, right? I'm pretty sure it was Bam Bam and Luna against Doink and Dink or whatnot, right? So she's been in the ring a couple of times, and the pairing with Bam Bam allowed her to get in the ring a little bit more. Now, one of the other people that was interviewed for this was Medusa. Now, I always thought Medusa and Luna did have heat back in the day, but Medusa spoke very highly of Luna in this documentary, and even told the story of Luna, of her wanting Luna to beat her for the title on a house show. What's the big deal? Just give her the title. And management said no, when she wanted to go out there and disobey management and allow Luna to beat her. And she told the story that they got in the ring, and Luna kind of backed out at the last minute because she didn't want Medusa to get fired, but she was so touched that Medusa would go that far for her. And as Medusa said here, she goes, I don't give a shit. And I believe the story, because back then, clearly, Alundra Blaze did not give a shit. She was in a women's division with no challengers whatsoever, just people they were bringing in for one-offs. There was really no division there, and she was just a year or so away from dropping that fucking title right in the trash can on Nitro. So she did not seem to care at all, and she would have been more than happy to do that favor for Luna Vachon. And that would have been some interesting shit if they changed the title there without permission, I bet you WWE would just not have acknowledged it. They probably wouldn't even gone through the motions of doing a rematch on the next show to give the title back to Medusa or Alundra Blaze at the time. They probably just would have not acknowledged it. So if that would have happened, it would have been interesting. And I think both women probably would have been let go for that, because WWE, it's not like the women's division means anything. Just scrap it. And Luna, back then, they probably would have let her go for something like that. So that was kind of an interesting story. They also talked about how Luna Vachon was the first woman ever in a video game. That was the WWE Raw, or I think it was WWE Raw. That came out on the Sega Genesis, which I have sitting right behind me. It's right back there. And she was in that game. And I think that might have been where some of the heat with Alundra Blaze came from, because Alundra was like, well, fuck, why am I not in the game? But, Luna was paired with Bam Bam. She was on TV more, honestly, than Alundra Blaze was. And she was she was more visible on TV, I think, at that time than Alundra. Maybe that was it. But she wasn't even really totally a wrestler at the time. She was more just hanging out with Bam Bam. So the video game stuff was cool for them to talk about that. And I like that Medusa story about how Medusa wanted to drop the title to her. And then they started, detailing more of her drug issues and even some of her attempted suicides, which her son brought up, which again is just like, God, I didn't know that she was struggling this badly. Yes, obviously she was doing the drugs and whatnot, but, didn't know it was to the point where she was attempting to take her own life. That's really sad. This was all prior to her kind of coming back. She would be gone and then she would come back. Now, she would also work in ECW. I want to say maybe around 95 or 96. Woman actually brought her into ECW, and Luna worked that cage match against Stevie Richards. They showed some clips of that in the documentary, so that was cool for them to talk about her brief little run through and pass through ECW. Also, they got into when she was brought back to WWE, and she was brought back with Goldust. And that was a weird time period in Goldust's career, because late 97, he was doing that stuff with Brian Pillman. Brian Pillman passed away. He split up with Terry, turned heel, started dressing up like dominatrix and with ball gags in his mouth. And he came out dressing like a Christmas tree one week, and he had Luna Vachon with him, and the two of them were fucking nuts. So they were kind of together, and that would take her into her issue and program with Sable. Now, Sable, as we remember, was super over at this time, and she was super hot, and she was going to be at the forefront of everything here, and Luna was really going to be pushed aside. So she talked, they used some audio of what I think is a shoot interview with Luna Vachon. I'm pretty sure I have this shoot in my collection somewhere, because I recognize some of what she was saying. But she was basically saying that Sable was going to be getting everything, and everybody hated Sable. She was handed everything just because she was pretty. And Luna recalled a story with Sable where Sable said something to the effect of, oh, I don't have to take bumps. I don't have to take bumps. Vince told me I'm going to be champion, which I can believe that Sable would say something like that. And of course, that really upset Luna. And I can understand that. And from a professional perspective, here you are, somebody that's like busted your ass, worked your whole life, trained, and trained some more, paid your dues 10 times over to make it in this business. And this woman gets to come in because she just gets accidentally discovered by Vince when he's trying to sign Mark Marrow. And because Vince is such a disgusting fucking pervert, he can't take his eyes off Sable. He becomes infatuated and just enthralled with her, like he does with a lot of women in the company, and just decides to give her everything and pay her $1 million and get her a Playboy deal and put the title on her and make her one of the biggest stars in the company and completely ruin Mark Marrow, the dude you were trying to originally sign. So Sable had heat from everybody, but I can imagine it was pretty strong with Luna Vachon, because, Luna was going to be used, to get Sable over at the expense of Luna and whatnot. And they talked about WrestleMania 14. Now, Luna claims that Vince McMahon said to her prior to their WrestleMania 14 match that if he hurts Sable, if she gets one bruise on her, then she is fired. This is where I have to dispute it a little bit, because as much as I know, and we all know that Vince McMahon can be a cutthroat son of a bitch, I really don't believe that he said that to her. I believe that Vince McMahon was infatuated with Sable. I believe that he was completely obsessed with her, totally. But I don't think it was to the point where he's walking around threatening other people not to hurt her. You're having a fucking wrestling match. Sable better get a bruise. What are you talking about? Don't bruise her. She better get a bruise. She's taking bumps on a mat. You're going to get a bruise. That mat's hard. Sable's 100 pounds. So I found that to be kind of a ridiculous claim. And even though Luna did say it, we don't know the state of mind that she was in at the time of that interview, and it's something that I just honestly don't believe happened. That's just me personally. Maybe you guys believe it. I just personally don't. But the WrestleMania 14 match itself is what really, I think, did it for her in terms of being like a monumental disappointment, because she went out there and had a great match. Have you guys ever seen that Mania 14 tag? It's really good. It is. And Luna went above and beyond to get Sable over. Luna went above and beyond to make Sable look good. She sold her ass off for her. And after the match, she tells the story of going backstage and everybody there is applauding, and she thinks they're applauding them. Hey, good job going out there as a professional, making this, green idiot look really good. But they were looking right past Luna and giving all the applause to Sable. And it hurt Luna's feelings to the point where Mick Foley and Owen Hart both individually spoke to her that night about what a great job she did. So that I do believe. I do believe that the locker room was clapping for Sable. Yes, but I don't believe that Vince said, if you hurt her, you're fired. No, there's no way he said that. So, I mean, Sable or Luna wouldn't have hurt Sable anyway. If Sable got hurt, it would be because of her own inexperience, not because of anything that Luna Vachon did to her. And Vince McMahon at that time probably understood that. That's why I just think that claim is ridiculous. Now, the next month, I was actually at that show. I was at Unforgiven 98 when Sable and Luna had the bra and panties match. And Sable got her bra, or I think Luna did. Sable won, and then she tore off her evening gown as well. Is that what it was? Evening gown match? I think that's what it was. And the fans were crazy that night. Sable was definitely over. And a lot of that was due to Luna putting her over. And then Jackie would go on to do much the same thing and pick up really where Luna left off. In the end, though, Gangrel tells a story about how he had to leave her. He had no choice. He just had no choice. It was a toxic environment. And he basically said that if he didn't leave her, they would both wind up dead. They were both heading down a bad road, lots of drug abuse. Even told a story where Luna spelled out "fuck you, Vince" and cocaine and snorted all of it. That's a funny and sad story all at the same time. But in the end, she would go on to leave WWE. They showed the clip from the Royal Rumble 2000 where she kind of refused to participate in that bikini contest, and she was released right after that. And not sure if that was the exact reason or not why, but she was gone right after that, and that was really the end of her career. She became a tow truck driver for a while and remained retired from the business until she was found dead by her mother in her house of a drug overdose. And apparently she was trying to snort some pills or something like that. Just really kind of an ugly scene there when she was found dead. And one thing I don't recall them getting into in the documentary, I don't know why they didn't mention this, but Andre the Giant is actually Luna Vachon's godfather. She was a kid. They were very close. And Luna's ashes was scattered on Andre's ranch in North Carolina. I wasn't paying attention to the very end. I don't remember them saying anything about that in Dark Side of the Ring. And I was like, I'm surprised I didn't mention that. But that's kind of how her life ended, in a really, really kind of sad way. And she's another example of somebody that I think in another line of work or being in a different environment or being surrounded by different people, she could easily be alive today. But unfortunately, it was kind of an ugly story, kind of a dark story. And it was a good episode. It really was. So that is pretty much wrapping up season 3. We just got one left, steroid trial, next week.